Hey, welcome to church. It is so good to have you here, especially if you're joining us for the very first time. My name's Dave and I'm part of the team here at Freedom. And if you are here for the first time, I want to encourage you to check out everything we're doing on social media, on YouTube. Get connected, especially if you're not connected in one of our physical locations. But if you are joining us in one of our fire starters, get to know some of our guys. We are so excited to have you here. There is so much going on in church right now. Today, we're starting a brand new series called Here, Now, and Forever. And it's all about the fact that we as Christians, we need to live our lives out right here and right now, but in the context of the fact that we're actually going to live forever in eternity with God. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in this event. But we just finished up an awesome series called I Love My Church. Last week we were talking about unity. I hope you've been actioning that message, but we're going to hear a little bit more about what's happening in our one-by-one funds, because there's so many different things happening. This is one of the ways that we love one another through generosity. So we're going to head over to Josh Cook in Cape Town to hear more.
Hi there, my name is Josh Cook and I am part of the One by One Funds team. And I wanted to let you know about some of the amazing things we have been able to see in the last 6 months since we launched. Recently we had our Run for Goma. And our Run for Goma, we had people running from 11 different countries all over the world, running 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons. And they were all running to help rebuild 2 schools in Goma in the DRC that were destroyed by a recent volcanic eruption. We have a partner organization called Justice Rising who do amazing work in Goma. And so we're helping them to rebuild those schools. We were able to raise £5,000 to be able to help contribute towards the rebuilding of those schools. And we are funding them monthly to help educate young girls and young boys in Goma today. So thank you to every one of you who got involved in our Run for Goma. But I want to let you know as well about 2 new partner organizations that we're going to be funding today. We're in the middle of a climate crisis. There are more extreme weather events happening more frequently than ever before around the world. And many countries that particularly have not contributed towards the carbon emissions are the ones who are being most impacted by them. And so we want to fund 2 new organizations who are helping people in some of those countries. Firstly, we're going to be funding an organization called Kids for Kids. This organization is based in Darfur in Sudan. They've been working for many years, doing many amazing things, but what we're going to be helping them to do is plant fruit trees around communities in Darfur to hold back the desert so that they can continue to grow their crops, feed their families, and get fruit from the trees during the hungrier times where the crops are not so good. It's an amazing thing that we get to be a part of. The second organization that I want to let you know about from the emergency fund that we're funding today is called Eagles. Eagles is based in Malawi, and in 2020, they planted nearly 80,000 trees. They did so in order to help improve the lives of the people in those communities, to help rebuild from flooding that had happened that year, and to prepare for and mitigate against the worst impacts of climate change in Malawi. And so we're going to be helping to plant more trees in that community. We are so excited to be able to fund solutions to climate change through our emergency fund. Thank you so much for those of you who give. And we're going to continue to give to a wide variety of different organizations through One by One. If you want to give today, please consider giving 1% of your income into One by One so that we can impact lives all over the world.
Thanks so much, Josh. Guys, it is such a privilege to be able to see life change through generosity. So I want to encourage you, if you've not yet given or started to give to One by One, please pray into that. Consider doing it. It's such a blessing for us as a family to be able to be involved and know that what we're investing is changing lives. But not only do we have an opportunity to give into things like One by One, but I also want to encourage you to give into our church directly. You can go to freedomchurch.cc/give, and all of the details that you need are there. We believe in this church in generosity, but we also believe in faithfulness and tithing. And we could not do any of what we do without the generosity and faithfulness of our people. So if you're not regularly giving into our church, but you call our church your home, then I want to encourage you to get involved. Another thing that's really exciting is what's happening within our kids ministry at the moment. And I want you to check out this clip of the current series.
So not giving up and sticking at things is all part of creativity. I like that.
Yep, and being courageous and brave in creativity is a part of who we are as the children of God. In fact, I know someone who also learned a skill that I think you might like to learn from. Let me show you.
Hi, I'm Audrey and I skateboard. I've been skateboarding for a couple of years now. It took me a couple of days to get used to it, but as I've kept getting on, kept falling off and learning my ways around it, now I can comfortably roll around every single day with a smile on my face. If you ever want to try anything new, like skateboarding, my advice to you would be keep believing in yourself, keep trying, keep getting up, and you'll get there. I love skateboarding because it's a time where I can find God and really focus on Him whilst everything else is in the background. And as the world is rushing by, it really gives me the time and space to remember how much God loves me and how grateful I am for everything He has given me.
Man, it's so awesome to hear that our kids are meeting Jesus on their level. And so I want to encourage you to be praying for our kids team's leaders, but also getting involved as they start a new series over the next few weeks. We're going to worship now around the world all together as one church. So if you're at home, get up off your sofa. If you're in your venues, get ready to bring your passion in our fire starters. Let's encounter God together today. After this time of worship, we're going to be heading over to Hereford campus and hearing from Kris Coppock, kicking us off in this Here, Now and Forever series. It's going to be absolutely incredible. Let's bring our wildfire.
There's a song that stirs the spirit, and it calls the heart to life. It's an anthem in the making. Can you feel it start to rise? Can you hear the generations getting louder over time? Every son and every daughter singing out into the night. It's not time to be silent, don't you dare hide your light. There's a world outside your window, so don't let it pass you by. Lift your hands to the heavens, lift your voice to the sky. Praise the Lord of all creation, let His name be lifted high. Sing it. From the palace to the streets, I can hear that trumpet pulsing and it's calling you and me. I can hear the world awaken, oh the sound is heavenly. Every tribe and every nation singing Jesus, I believe. It's not time to be silent, don't you dare hide your light. There's a world outside your window, so don't let it pass you by. Lift your hands to the heavens, lift your voice to the sky. Praise the Lord of all creation, let His name be lifted high. Sing it. time. See the strongholds break in a blink of an eye. Death and all our sin nowhere in sight. For the Lord, He is alive. See the lost return from the dead of the night. Every captive freed, every chain left behind. Have you ever seen such a beautiful sight? All the world coming alive. See the world light up one heart at a time. See the strongholds break in a blink of an eye. Death and all our sin nowhere in sight. For the world, He is alive. See the lost return from the dead of the night. Every captive freed, every chain left behind. Have you ever seen such a beautiful sight? All the world coming alive. Silent, don't you dare hide your light. There's a world outside your window, so don't let it pass you by. Lift your hands to the heavens, lift your voice to the sky. Praise the Lord of all creation, let His name be lifted high.
Hold me now in the hands that created heaven. Find me now where the grace runs as deep as your scars. You pulled me from the clay. You set me on a rock. You called me by your name. Make my heart whole again. Lift it up, and my knees go in your spirit leads. Broken as my life may be, I will give you every piece. A sacrifice. Use me how you want to, God. Have your throne within my heart. I hear you call. I am available. I say yes, Lord. I am available.
Welcome to this message today. It's so good to be here. It's so good to be sharing this wherever you're joining from today. I'm so grateful that I get to share this morning. And I'm going to jump right in from the get-go. This is a moment, an opportunity for some audience participation. And I'm going to ask you a question. Wherever you are, shout out the answer. What was God's greatest gift to us? What was God's greatest gift to us? Come on, shout it out. Jesus. I'm so relieved to hear that in every location around the world. Jesus was God's greatest gift. Jesus who came from heaven and lived amongst us. Jesus who ministered to his people. Jesus who taught and built community with his people. Jesus who loved his people. Jesus who healed his people. Jesus who, when the time came, gave his life up for all of us. He was crucified on a cross. He died, but death couldn't contain Jesus. Jesus broke out of the grave. And Paul tells us that 500, the Apostle Paul in the Bible tells us that 500 people saw the resurrected Jesus before he ascended to heaven, where he reigns from today. If this sounds like a big theology dump, I just want to encourage you to look around the space that you're in right now, if you're in one of our locations. Because around you today are lives that have been touched and changed by Jesus. Jesus to us is real. Jesus has made us whole. He's healed us. He's given us strength when we couldn't move forward. I really encourage you today, if you're in one of our locations or you're listening to this message, and you wouldn't consider yourself to be in a relationship with Jesus, you're listening to this today because Jesus loves you. Jesus has a vision for your life. And Jesus wants to be in a deeper, closer relationship with you. So Jesus, God's greatest gift to all of us. But what was God's second greatest gift? Coffee, thank you for that, coffee. What was God's third greatest gift? His fourth greatest gift? I hope some of the guys are shouting out, my wife! Come on, thanks for that. Truth be told, we don't often talk about that, do we? We don't often talk about that in church, and really, we don't actually need to agree on those kind of details anyway. But I don't think it would be very long if we were having the discussion about the top 5 greatest gift God had given to us, that somebody would actually bring up this incredible thing. Let's turn our eyes to the screen, this incredible thing that is our planet, this blue-green planet that we live on, this incredible environment that gives us everything we need to eat, everything we need to breathe, everything we need to raise our families if you have a family, everything you need to live out your life. It all comes from this incredible planet that we live on. And if you need reminding today how awesome this planet is, turn your eyes to the screen because we're going to watch a short video now to stir the love for Earth within us. Let's have a look. That God put us on this earth, and it's not just a functional environment for us to go about our lives. It's actually incredibly beautiful, isn't it? You know, God said of the earth in the creation story, it says he looked across creation, all that he'd made, and he said it's very good. I think we can agree with him that it is very good. And when God says something's very good, it really is very good. It says in Psalm 24 that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and everything in it. It all belongs to him. And God hasn't checked out and handed over this real estate and disengaged. It's still his. This is his earth. And I'm sure he's very, very proud of all that he created in the earth. And yet, for all its beauty and for all of our dependence upon it, one of the biggest conversations that is happening in the world right now is the conversation around climate change. All around the world, whether you've engaged with it or not, I guarantee that people in your nation are talking about climate change right now. It's a huge topic of conversation. It's not something that we necessarily talk lots about in the church. I think that depends on your own perspective. It seems to me that there are three groups of people in the church, as indeed in the world. There are people who are very engaged, people who are very committed to wanting to see a shift around climate change, people who have a strong passion for the environment. At the opposite end of the spectrum, there are people that are quite skeptical. I think that that's an ever-diminishing and ever-shrinking group of people. And then in the middle sit the rest of us. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm about to share a message with you on climate change. I sit somewhere in the middle. I'm not preaching. Right now in the UK, we've got people gluing themselves to the road to stop the traffic as a protest for climate change. I haven't just come back from gluing myself to the road. I'm somebody that cares about the environment. I recognize that I live in this environment. My kids live in this environment. Hopefully their kids will live in this environment too, if that's what they decide. We depend upon this environment, and we do some recycling, and we're conscious. I try and use my bicycle. But if I'm honest with you, it seems like there's this huge conversation going on, but it's not necessarily translating into masses of change in my home. Perhaps you can agree with me. Perhaps that relates to you. I know that won't relate to everyone. That won't be true of everyone, but I think that is true of a lot of us. Some of us will be hearing me talking about this and think, is this some kind of political agenda that sits over here, or some kind of environmentalist agenda that sits over there, and my spirituality is here? Today, I want to say to us that I don't believe it is. I believe that God is interested in the world that we live in. I believe that we as Christians should engage in the conversation around climate change. You know who does want to have this conversation in the church today? And that's young people. One of the things that I came across about 6 months ago that really impacted me was a statistic that was shared from a survey that an organization called Tearfund did here in the UK. I know we're not all in the UK. I wasn't in the UK myself until recently. But in the UK, they asked hundreds and hundreds of teenagers in the church, what they're most concerned about. And one of the things that they were most concerned about, 9 out of 10 were deeply concerned about the environment. But only 1 out of 10 felt that their church was engaged enough in the climate crisis. We look around all the time, don't we, and say, we want church to be relevant to young people. We want to see young people in church. One of the ways I think that we can achieve that is talking about the things that they care about most and engaging with the things that they care about most. So we're going to hear off just a couple of teenagers, a couple of younger people within our church now. Let's turn our eyes again to the screen.
What's climate change, George?
It's a climate change, and my top is a dinosaur.
It is a dinosaur. Is it about the planet?
The planet. The climate is changing.
Climate change is human activity across the world, giving off greenhouse gases and making living conditions worse all over the world.
I think it's impacted everything because of the hotter it gets, everything gets dehydrated and the plants won't grow properly because it needs water as well, and if it gets too hot, they'll just die.
One way that climate change affects us now is that we get more extreme weather, including floods, which means that people get trapped in their houses and we have to rescue them.
What we can do to help with climate change is to use less cars, so petrol or diesel cars. We can walk more places or ride on our bike. We can also use less electricity in our house.
So the others can live better.
I think it's really important to talk about climate change because if we don't educate people, then we won't be able to make the changes that need to be changed.
So the others can help too.
And because unnatural disasters will happen in the future.
One thing that we can do to help prevent climate change is to use more renewable energy sources. Even though it may cost us more, if we don't pay, then future generations will have to pay much, much more. I'm really concerned about climate change because if we don't preserve the life that's on Earth now, then generations to come won't have the same experience as us.
We need to get our world prepared for the next generation because our lives depend on it.
An eloquent group of young people from within our church. And they talked about some of the climate change headlines. This is going to perhaps sound a little bit like a science lesson for a moment, but let's go with it. Climate change. What causes climate change? The burning of fossil fuels. And we burn fossil fuels to do pretty much everything that we like to do and to enjoy pretty much everything that we do enjoy. All the stuff in our homes and the cars we drive around in or the public transport that we use is powered by fossil fuels, the burning of fossil fuels. And as they burn, greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere, and those gases are creating a blanket around the earth. The sun's heat comes through the blanket, but it can't escape out of the blanket to the same extent, and so slowly the earth is warming up. And there is a consensus now around the world that there is some figures, some increase in temperature that we need to hit to prevent damage, long-term damage being done to the earth. And that figure is somewhere between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, ideally 1.5 degrees hotter than it was before the Industrial Revolution that happened a century or two ago. Right now, we're not on course to hit that target. Actually, it looks like we're going to be somewhere closer to 2.5 degrees or 3 degrees, perhaps even 4 degrees. And the outlook for the planet, if that happens, is very, very poor. Extreme weather events are predicted, the melting of ice around the world, the rising of the level of the sea, plant life, animal life will be severely impacted. And I don't think that's anything that any of us want to see happen to the earth. Climate change isn't just it's not peripheral to what we're about as the church or as followers of Jesus. Instead, the reality is climate change isn't just terrible in and of itself, but it will impact on a lot of the things that we believe as Christians and a lot of the things that we care about. And so today, I want to spend a little bit of time joining up the dots for us around the impact of climate change on the earth and how it relates to what we believe and what we're passionate about and what we love as well. Because I think when we do that, we're going to view climate change in a slightly different way. So there are 5 things that I think we all need to know about climate change. I've picked 5. There were lots more we could have talked about, but I've picked 5 that we all need to engage with when it comes to climate change. Before I launch into the first, let me just say this. I think as a people, we believe that when God gives us something or when God places things in our lives or in our hands, we should steward those things really well. What I mean by that is we should make the most of them. We should multiply the good things. We should look to seek to make a positive impact around us rather than using up and reducing those things. And today, I think it would be reasonable to say that there is something of a stewardship crisis happening in the world around us when it comes to maybe to personal health. Lots of us are wrestling with health issues, some of our own doing, some not of our own doing, but it's about stewarding our bodies, some of it, isn't it, and caring for our bodies. When it comes to relationships and to marriages, there's a sad statistic out there that in some places in the world, more marriages fail than survive. And that's not because marriage is failing, it's because we're struggling in our stewardship of our relationships. Debt levels around the world are extraordinarily high, and that's about the way we steward finance. And the reason that I'm sharing this is that actually we need to recognize that climate change is a stewardship crisis as well. And that's a reason why we as Christians should care about climate change. You know, whether you're an activist or a skeptic or you sit somewhere in the middle, I think we've all been called to steward well God's creation. And the evidence says, and the evidence that's received and agreed by lots and lots of people all around the world, an increasing number of people all around the world, says that we're not doing it well enough. Let's have a look what it says in Genesis 1 and in Genesis 2 when it comes to how we steward creation. So Genesis 1:28, let me read this. It says, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. I've pulled out this verse because I think very often as Christians, when we think of creation, we think God left us in charge of it to do as we would choose with it. And that can evoke at times a sense that we get to subdue it, or we get to dominate it, or we get to, take charge of it and use it as we need it used. But I pulled out this word here, rule over. In Hebrew, it's the word radah, which speaks of rulership. And I think there are different ways that we can interpret this word, especially when we consider it and when we consider the way it's been used elsewhere in the Bible. So we're going to jump across to Psalm 72 now, where the same word is used to describe some great leadership on the part of a leader. It says, may he rule, may he radar, from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. For he will deliver the needy who cry out, and the afflicted who have no one to help. He will take pity on the weak and the needy and save the needy from death. He will rescue them from oppression and violence, for precious is their blood in his sight. You know, what I love about this psalm and what it reminds us is that great rulership from the perspective of God is not just about dominating or subduing. You know, God takes authority. It's actually essentially about stewardship and good governance. It's about care and compassion and being faithful. And that's who God is, isn't it? When we think of God, that's how God leads and how God loves us. And so we have to recognize that when God put us on earth, he called us to take charge of creation around us and to care for it in a way that reflects his leadership, and that the importance of stewardship is core within that. It goes on to say in Genesis 2 that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to take care of it. And again, the words here, the Hebrew words here are abad and samar. Abad means to serve and keep, and to samar means to guard and protect. God put man in the garden, he put man in the environment and said, you need to keep this, you need to guard this, you need to protect this. That's what good godly stewardship looks like. And as we start to engage in that, it starts to remind us, doesn't it, that actually we should care about climate change. We should engage with the conversation around climate change, because as believers, as followers of Jesus, we're called to care for the earth and to protect it and look after it. And let me just give you this example. Imagine you spend a long time building a very, very beautiful house with a beautiful garden around it, and you're very, very pleased with it. You say, wow, this is very good. And then you decide to take a trip away, and you think, well, who shall we leave to look after this for us? Oh, I know, we'll ask Kris and Naomi and their 5 children. I mean, you'd be crazy. But we'll ask them to come and look after it for us, because I'm sure they'll take good care of it. So we move into your beautiful house, and you disappear. We wave you off. Perhaps we give you a lift to the airport. Off they go. And then slowly over the course of the next year, we completely trash your house. We want some firewood, so we cut down your trees, and we're a bit hungry, so the kids fish the fish out of the pond, and, you know, the pet rabbit gets it. You know, we trash the place. We don't clean the place. We don't look after the place. It starts to break down around us. What are you going to think when you come back to your house? You're going to say, why on earth do we leave these idiots here to look after the place? And I say to you, well, you left me in charge. That's not what we'd want for our homes, is it? It's not what we'd want for our homes, and it's not what we want for the planet around us. A few years ago, I was traveling somewhere, and somebody took me to see a small valley that they were involved in purchasing. And this valley, it had some beautiful kind of slopes, as valleys do, and it had a water source, or it did have a water source down the middle. But what had happened is, for generations, this valley had been sustainably farmed. You know, people had grown trees and produced fruit and taken harvest from the valley, and they'd had animals that they'd grazed, livestock they grazed in the valley. And then it changed hands, it changed ownership, and the new owner came along and took everything away, took all the trees away and all the grass and everything away, and planted a big crop to harvest. And within a couple of seasons, all of the soil had run from the valley slopes, blocked the water source, and we were stood looking at this valley, and it was such a mess. It was becoming a desolate landscape. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is that's one way to steward what God has placed within your hands, but I don't think it's a good way to steward it. And you could look there and you could say, well, this is my valley, and my valley's not great, but their valley's even worse over there, or that valley over there is terrible. Is God interested in speaking to us about their valley and their valley, or does he want to have a conversation with us about our valley? We account to God for our valleys, don't we? For our choices and our decisions and our stewardship. And I think we're all called to steward the earth well. We all play a role in the damage that's being done to the earth right now, and we should all play a part in addressing climate change as well. Another thing that you don't often hear us teaching in church is the idea that greed and materialism and stockpiling is a really good thing. No, that's not something you will ever hear us saying from the stage. Just stockpile all you want. Don't worry about anybody else. The bigger your pile, the better. That's not what we believe as Christians. In fact, we would say, actually, that's an ungodly thing to do. That's a wrong thing to do. Well, we need to recognize that climate change is fueled by excessive consumption. climate change is fueled by excessive consumption, and that's a reason that we should care about it as well. Now, this message is going out all over the world in some very different situations. And I want to be really, really clear here that some of us are making a far greater contribution to climate change than others, and that's important for us to engage with as well. I've got a graph for you. Brace yourselves for a graph here that's going to come up on screen. This graph, I just want to say, I know that North America is a continent, and Africa is a continent, and the UK is a nation, but there were a limited number of boxes that I could tick to produce this graph. But the point that this graph is making, this shows us fossil fuel consumption per person in these places. And you can see that across the nations of Africa, and this is going out to a number of nations in Africa, our brothers, sisters, our family and friends in Africa are using so much less, and indeed in India, so much less fossil fuels than those of us in the UK and in North America. In fact, in the UK and North America, in these economies that are considered or referred to as developed, we're consuming so much in the way of fossil fuels, 10 times, 20 times the amount of other parts of the world. Put it another way, if everybody in the world wanted to live as those of us who are in the UK listening to this message live, we'd need 2.5 planets to sustain us. But if everybody in the world lived as our friends and family in Uganda live, we'd only need half a planet to sustain us. And that's not necessarily a good thing. If I could just say this, in some places people are not consuming a lot, and the Bible would call that an injustice. That's not okay. Let me just show you this other chart I've got. There's not going to be lots of charts, so don't worry too much if you're not a fan of a chart. The point of this chart is this shows how from between 1990 and 2015, how much different groups of people within the world's population created emissions. And what you can see from this chart is that the poorest 50% of the world's population were responsible for 7% of the greenhouse gas emissions between 1990 and 2015. This is from an organization called Oxfam. The richest 10% were responsible for 52%. Climate change is fueled by excessive consumption, but not everyone is responsible for that excessive consumption. And in some parts of the world, there is a desperate need for an increase in consumption. The World Bank estimates that half of the world can't access basic health services. The World Health Organization says that 1 in 10 people in the world lives without electricity, no power at home. And UNICEF says that 1 in 3 people don't have access to clean drinking water in their home. I think we would all agree that that's got to change. Our vision for the world, God's heart for the world, that's got to change. The problem is, if we continue to consume excessive amounts of fossil fuels in some parts of the world, it makes it very, very difficult for that to happen. We have to take personal responsibility, and we've got to ask ourselves, particularly those of us that know we live in environments where we have a lot of stuff and our lives require a lot of power. We buy a lot of technology, we eat a lot of food, we travel a lot. We've got to ask ourselves, how much is enough? And at what point do we tip over from enough to too much? At what point do we tip over? The figures would suggest we're way past that right now. There's nothing wrong with comfort. Please hear me on this. It's not that God doesn't want us to live comfortable lives, but there is an issue, isn't there, when our comfort is consuming so much that it's damaging and destroying the world around us. I've pulled out a verse from the book of James, health warning, book of James. Here it comes. One of my favorite books in the Bible, because it always feels like you've had a good workout when you read the book of James. James 5, verse 1-5 says this: "Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail." I know, it's a tough one. "Weep and wail because of the misery that's coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify you and eat your flesh like fire." I think the point he's making is they've got so much stuff, it's just going off. It's stockpiled, it's corroding, it's getting moth-eaten. There's so much of it. You've hoarded wealth in the last days. And it goes on, the last part of this verse says this: "You've lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence." It's a rebuke from the book of James. And there are lots of us in lots of parts of the world where we have lots and lots of stuff, and we consume lots and lots of stuff, that have to respond to this. Climate change is fueled by excessive consumption, and that's something we need to care about as followers of Jesus. Another thing that we're really passionate about in the church, and another thing that's really core to our faith, is the idea that we care for and we advance the cause of those who are living in poverty or those who are experiencing injustice. People around the world living in financial poverty, people around the world who are living in extremely difficult situations, maybe disaster zones and things like that. We want to care for the widows and the orphans in their distress. That's part of what we've been called to do as the church. Well, we need to recognize that climate change disproportionately affects the world's financially poorest people. Climate change disproportionately affects the world's financially poorest people. And this is what I mean by that people who are financially poorer bear the brunt of the effects of climate change. They're already bearing the brunt of the effects of climate change. And that's another reason that as followers of Jesus, we should engage in this conversation, we should care about it. And it's basically because climate change is making the weather more extreme and more erratic. We've always had to contend with the weather. It's not that, the weather has never historically been out of control. It has been. But all of the evidence and all of the data shows that it's getting more extreme and more erratic. Droughts are getting more common and stronger. Floods are getting stronger. Wildfires are getting stronger. And you only have to switch on the news or click onto a news website to see week after week the evidence of that. And there are two key issues here, I believe, when it comes to the impact of climate change on the financially poorest people in the world. The first is that actually, if you live in a wealthier part of the world, you're probably better able to cope with the impact of climate change than if you live in a part of the world that's financially poorer. And the second thing is there are lots of fragile environments in the world, and a great many of those are in parts of the world where people do not have a lot of money. And that's an issue because you need money to be able to ride the waves. You need money to be able to address the issues. Climate change disproportionately affects the poor. I just pulled this statement out from a United Nations publication. It says over 2/3 of today's disasters are linked to climate change caused by human activity. These climate hazards, including cyclones, hazards, and drought, increasingly threaten the lives of the world's poorest, especially women and children. We're here to champion the cause of the widow and the orphan, aren't we? And just a couple of little stories to kind of bring this to life. About 18 months ago in Hereford, there was a flood. We were not in Hereford at the time, but we saw the pictures. Here's one of them from a newspaper. And the building in the middle here that's underwater is our UK HQ, the Forge. And what's interesting about this picture is a few years earlier when we bought the Forge, we had to pay a lot of money because of some work that we were having done to get a flood risk analysis done. And this flood risk analysis arrived on my desk. And I've got to be honest, I was a little put out that we were spending all this money on a flood report. And I flicked through the report and it said 1 in 100 flood will look like this. And I thought, that's not very good. And 1 in 500, oh, that's not very good at all, but that's not going to happen 1 in 500 years. I'll be long gone. Won't be my issue. And then a 1 in 1,000 year flood. And I was like, why did we pay all this money for this report? That's never going to happen. This is a 1 in 1,000 year flood event. And the report was entirely accurate, I'm slightly gutted to say. And it was a huge inconvenience, but you know what? We were actually okay. We claimed on the insurance. We were able to access finance. People were able to move into other property. I'm not saying that it didn't impact people, because some people did get very impacted by this flood. But there were safety nets to catch us, because that's what happens in places like Hereford, in the UK and Western Europe, and North America and Australia and places like that. I read this on a BBC News article this weekend. Over the last 50 years, more than 2 out of 3 deaths caused by extreme weather, including droughts, wildfire, and floods, occurred in the 47 least developed countries. People are not dying so much in places like Hereford. People are dying in other environments like northern Ethiopia, where right now the drought is extreme. Let me introduce you to Orbissa, who Orbissa was recently included in a video put out by Tear Fund. And Orbissa and her family, she has 10 children, live in northern Ethiopia, where it used to rain for 4 months of the year, but right now it only rains for 1 month of the year. And what that basically means is that animals are dying, and people are sick, and communities are breaking up because there isn't the rain, there isn't the water to sustain people. Orbissa has to go out with a jerry can and try and find water. And when she finds water, she can't carry enough water back for her family. And so most nights her kids were going to bed thirsty. I think Jesus says something in Matthew 25 about whatever we do for the least. When I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. Her kids were going to bed thirsty. Fortunately for Orbissa, Tear Fund has installed a solar-powered pump in her community, so she's able to access more water. But the point is, that community and that fragile environment has been so impacted that this self-reliant entrepreneur who's capable and clever and able to sort her own issues out has not been able to do that. And it's not because of the climate change that she's created, it's because of the impact of a climate crisis that's been created elsewhere. Again, I think these are reasons. I don't want to make life more difficult for Orbissa, and I don't think any of us do in Freedom Church. And one of the ways that we can help her and millions of other people living in vulnerable communities is by addressing climate change. It says in Proverbs 21:13, whoever shuts their ears to the cry of the poor will also cry out and not be answered. It's challenging, isn't it? Challenging for us. Okay, we're going to move on to the next point that I want to make. And from time to time in church, we'll talk about things like cathedral thinking. The idea that, we celebrate these stories we hear from ages long ago of people planting woodlands and forests 50 or 100 years, before the wood was needed, so the wood could be chopped down to build cathedrals, places of worship. That mindset to think ahead like that is absolutely incredible. David, who in the Bible, King David, wasn't permitted to build the temple, and so he used the last years of his life to stockpile the resources and come up with the plans to set Solomon up for the win, so Solomon could lead God's people into the golden ages of the nation of Israel. We like this idea that we're going to pass on to the next generation something more than we arrived with ourselves. We talk about the idea of defeating our giants so that our kids don't have to, defeating our Goliaths. Well, we need to keep in mind that climate change is the worst inheritance that we can live to our children and our grandchildren. That's why we as the church, we as followers of Jesus, need to engage with this. Are we determined to defeat climate change? Or will it be a legacy that we leave to our kids and our grandkids to defeat? Will our kids look back and say, thank you? Or will they look back and say, what were they thinking? What were they thinking? And I really had to wrestle over whether or not to share this next thing with you, but it's a bit personal, but I decided to in the end. I want to share with you a picture of a man named Arthur, who was my grandfather. And my grandfather is no longer with us. He died a number of years ago. He was an incredible man, a wonderful man, a kind man, a compassionate man, a caring man. In the early 1940s, at the age of 17, my grandfather went and signed up to join the British Army, like lots of people all over the world who found themselves drawn into what was then the Second World War, a battle that was taking place in Europe and in other parts of the world as well. And, my grandfather thought, I'm going to sign up, I'm going to become a tank driver, I'll be safe in a tank. He very quickly realized as he drove his tank across Holland and eventually into Berlin that there was nowhere to hide on the battlefield. And, he endured the unimaginable and lost many, many, many of his friends in that war, as indeed have many people through the ages who have been involved in battles. The reason that my grandfather went to war, I believe, was because that was what he thought was the right way to respond to a crisis in his generation. And one of the reasons that my grandfather and his generation are heroes to me is that today I believe we get to enjoy a lot of freedom that we wouldn't otherwise have. They defeated fascism and Nazism. Helped defeat fascism and Nazism, as did millions of other people around the world, women and men. And we get to enjoy a huge amount of freedom as a result of that. And we look back and we say they were heroes. So what are we going to do on our watch? Now it's our time to step up to the crisis. If I may, slightly harshly, but politely say, I think the last 18 months has shown us that we struggle a bit when it comes to fighting a fight. All the complaints about face masks. It's like, but we have to step up and we have to respond. What will our children, our grandchildren say of us? They stepped up and they engaged in order to secure the future. This is what it says in Proverbs 13, verse 22. It says, a good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. A good person leaves an inheritance for their children's children. That's why we need to engage with climate change as followers of Jesus. The last thing is, every now and then I'll watch a Hollywood movie or a movie from some other part of the world. And, and every now and then there's a movie that involves an asteroid, hurtling towards the Earth to destroy the Earth. And most people in the world can't do anything about that. They just either have to panic or carry on going about their lives or sit and wait for the inevitable destruction to happen, which never happens because it's a movie. A small number of people step up and save the Earth from destruction. Well, climate change isn't like that. It doesn't need a few people to solve the problem for us. What we have to remember about climate change is a crisis that we can all do something about. Now, research shows that evangelical Christians, which would be a lot of us, tend to be a little bit more skeptical about climate change than most other groups of people. I think when we hear about climate change, When we read our Bibles, we start to look and say, well, all of this chaos and catastrophe and crisis, isn't this what it's like towards the end? Let me just read something that Jesus said in Luke 21, verses 25 to 26. He said, there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars on the earth. Nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. People will faint from terror, apprehensive of what is coming on the world, for the heavenly bodies will be shaken. I mean, that does sound pretty terrible, doesn't it? And maybe, the roaring of the sea, maybe it is something to do with climate change. I don't know. But the thing that I think we need to engage with is he might be talking about climate change in this, but he might not be talking about climate change in this. If we think that he's talking about climate change in this, we think, well, that kind of erodes my will to try and do something about this because it's all inevitable. It's all going to happen. It kind of weakens our resolve. And I'll be honest with you, I've certainly thought that at times. Don't judge me. I've certainly thought that at times. But as I've reflected over the years and as I've been reflecting on this message, I think there's a few tough questions we've got to ask ourselves, like, what happens if we're wrong? What happens if actually he isn't about to come back? We trash the planet, we then have to live with the consequences, and actually people pay a huge, huge price as a result of our inaction. That's an important thing to consider. Secondly, what kind of planet would he like to come back to anyway? Do you remember how you felt about the way I treated your home? And maybe when Jesus comes back, he wants to come back to a 5-talent world that we've done our best to preserve and to build and to grow and to care for, rather than a 1-talent, 1-buried talent world where the wheels are falling off and the place looks like it's been trashed. And finally, how does this idea sit with my theology anyway? Aren't we the people that talk about redemption and transformation? Aren't we the people that say we don't take the world as it is and live with it? We see the world transformed. We're the people that believe in miracles. We're the people that believe that God can make a way where there is no way, that God can move the mountains and part the seas and do something incredible. Climate change, it might seem huge and overwhelming and like something we can't make a difference to, but we can all make a difference. And the toughest situations in the world are the very situations that God is most great at doing something with, or God is really great at doing something with. When God's people were trapped in slavery, he said to a guy called Moses, go and lead them into freedom. And Moses said, you've got the wrong guy. When God's people were getting overrun by raiders, he said to a man named Gideon, get out the winepress. I'm calling you to lead here. And he said, are you sure? I'm the least. When Joseph was locked in the prison and a drought was heading towards Egypt, God put a demand upon Joseph's life to step up and respond to the highest position in the land to lead the people through that climate catastrophe, through that climate crisis. I think we can all do something about climate change. And I think this is another reason why we need to engage in the conversation. Hey, to bring this into landing, I shared with you what I think, some of the reasons I think that climate change is a crisis that we should all care about, and that climate change is a crisis that we should act to address. Climate change impacts on things that we care about a lot, and things that we believe as the people of God. And I really hope that we can agree on what I'm saying here. Do you know what? If we don't, that's okay. Let me just say, this isn't an issue that should divide us as the church. I'm not willing to let this issue divide us as a church. Again, I think the ability to make our own choices and believe what we choose to believe is another reason that a lot of people have given their lives on battlefields around the world. So we can actually choose what we believe. But if you do agree with me, the good news, we can all make a difference on climate change. And I know already lots of people in our church will be doing what they can do or making a contribution to help address climate change. But I think what I'm feeling today, what I've been sharing today, it calls us to engage even more in the conversation for every one of us. As I was preparing this message, I said to Naomi, I can't preach this message and then we not have a follow-on conversation about our lives. My daughter kept asking us, has been asking us, recently here in the UK, the Chancellor released a budget explaining what the finances of the UK are going to look like over the next few years. And she kept saying to me, has he mentioned climate change yet? Has he mentioned climate change yet? And I'm gonna leave it open as to the answer to that question. We can't not engage with this. We can't not take some steps and act off the back of this. And that's what I'm asking us to do as a church. we can all make a difference to this. I think lots of us are waiting for our governments to act, but the Bible specifically says to us, Psalm 146, don't put your faith in princes to save because they're mere mortal men. We're not going to put our hope. Lots of governments are doing great things, but we can do great things as well. We're going to put our trust in God. We're going to put our trust in Jesus, who in the middle of a storm stood up in a boat and rebuked the wind and rebuked the waves, and his disciples said, oh my goodness. Oh, they didn't say that, but oh my goodness. Even the wind and the waves obey you, Jesus. We're going to put our faith in God, take some steps personally, and collectively act as the church. So there are 3 simple things that I want to put out as I finish this off, 3 simple steps that I want to encourage as many of us as possible, all of us, to take. The first thing that we need to do is we need to pray, because we need a divine solution. We need a divine response to what's happening in the world right now. We need new technologies to help solve the problem so we can see people living in poverty, improve their quality of life, whilst at the same time reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There are all kinds of things we need to see. And especially right now, if you're not aware of it, most of the heads of state and governments from around the world are all meeting together to discuss this very issue. We need to see God move in that meeting, bring the world to a place of consensus and agreement. It is happening, but there's more that's needed. So we're going to pray, and I'm going to make this so easy. Over the next few weeks, as this message goes out around the world, we're going to post some prayer points to the prayer app. So all you need to do is download the Freedom Church prayer app if you haven't already got it, register, access your app, and pray into this. Second thing that I'm asking all of us to do is to engage, to learn about it, to talk about it. Confession. I haven't done that enough. I'm not stood here preaching this message, as I said at the beginning, because I'm an environmentalist. I need to engage more. We as a family need to engage more. We need to engage with this issue, talk about it, learn about it. And if you're looking for a very simple place to go for some resources, there are great resources out there. There are also some weird things on the internet as well. So I would point you to something called tearfund.org. Tearfund are an international development charity. If you Google Tearfund and climate change, you're going to find some great videos that I drew on for this message, and that would be a really great place to start in terms of engaging in the conversation around climate change. And finally, the last thing is act now. Let's act now. Let's take steps ourselves. And again, this message is going out to so many places around the world. There isn't a single resource that I can point everyone to and say this is relevant to everywhere. But I thought it would be helpful if I pointed some of us towards a resource. So if you tap fdom.ch/act-now into your internet browser, what you're going to do is you'll find an article that's got 9 things that we could all do to help make a difference around climate change. I hope that's helpful in helping you take a next step with this. Hey, thank you so much for listening to this message. So grateful for the opportunity for us to talk as a church family about climate change today and why we need to respond. Thanks, team.
Man, it's such a powerful message, and it's something I want to encourage all of us to think about how we can action and change over the week to come. I love the fact that in so many areas of our life, God entrusts things to us to steward and make better than when it came to us. So this week, guys, what are you going to do in this context of that for your life? Let's be an action people. Let's not just hear things on a Sunday. Let's do them on a Monday. Let's share it on social media this week and help others to grasp God's heart for our world and for our lives. We're going to be heading into part 2 next week, so come and join us. However you've joined us today, perhaps if you joined us digitally, if you want to come to one of our physical locations, a Firestarter, we'd love to see you in person. But otherwise, guys, can't wait to be with you and see you at church next week.